The church doors stayed shut. 300 guests whispered behind white gloves and crystal champagne flutes, their voices sharpening with every minute that crawled past. Seren Ashford stood frozen at the altar in silk and lace, white roses trembling in her grip, her breath catching on the edge of panic. The groom was gone, vanished. And when those heavy oak doors finally swung open, it wasn't the man she'd agreed to marry who walked through. It was his older brother, the one they whispered about in back rooms and boardrooms, the one who built his empire on fear and absolute control. He strode down that aisle like he owned the ground beneath every pew, black suit sharp as a blade, eyes dark and unreadable. And before the scandal could devour her whole, he made an offer that would change everything. If you want to see how a disastrous wedding turned into something far more dangerous and far more consuming, stay with me until the very end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see just how far this story reaches. Eat. The roses were dying. Seren noticed it first in the petals, how they'd started to brown at the edges, curling inward like they were trying to protect themselves from what was coming. She'd been holding the bouquet for 40 minutes now, standing at the front of St. Catherine's with her spine straight and her smile locked in place, pretending she didn't hear the whispers building behind her like a wave about to break. "He's not coming. Did you see his father leave? I heard the Ashfords are bankrupt. Maybe he found out." Her fingers tightened around the stems. The thorns bit through the silk wrapping, but she didn't let go. Couldn't. Because the moment she lowered her hands, the moment she turned around and faced those 300 guests in their designer suits and judgment, it would be real. Tyler Harrington was late to his own wedding, or worse, he wasn't coming at all. Seren's mother sat in the front pew, her face pale beneath powder and pearls, hands clasped so tight her knuckles had gone white. Her father wasn't even looking at the altar anymore. He was staring at the floor, jaw working like he was chewing through words he couldn't say out loud. And Seren knew, she knew, that this wedding was supposed to fix everything. The debts, the whispers, the slow, humiliating collapse of the Ashford name. Tyler Harrington came from new money, tech money, the kind that made old guard families uncomfortable but desperate enough to overlook it. He was handsome in that smooth, forgettable way, charming when he needed to be, safe. Or at least that's what she told herself. The officiant cleared his throat for the third time, glancing toward the vestibule like he was hoping for a miracle. Seren felt her pulse in her throat, her temples, behind her eyes. The string quartet had stopped playing 10 minutes ago. Now there was just silence and the rustle of expensive fabric as people shifted in their seats, craning their necks, pulling out phones. Someone laughed. Just once. A sharp, nervous sound that cut through the air like glass breaking. That's when the doors opened. Not a crack, not a cautious peek. They slammed wide, both at once, and the sound echoed through the vaulted ceiling like a gunshot. Every head turned, every breath held. The man who walked in wasn't Tyler. He was taller, broader, older by maybe 5 or 6 years, though it was hard to tell because everything about him seemed carved from something harder than the boy she'd agreed to marry. He wore black, a suit so dark it seemed to drink the light, tailored to perfection, no tie. The collar open just enough to remind everyone that he didn't follow rules, he made them. His hair was pushed back, still damp like he'd come straight from somewhere else. Somewhere that mattered more than this. Seren's heart kicked once, hard, against her ribs. She knew who he was. Everyone did. Dante Harrington, Tyler's older brother. The one the family didn't talk about at dinner parties. The one whose name appeared in financial papers and police blotters, always just outside the reach of consequences. He ran everything Tyler's father pretended not to profit from. The clubs, the docks, the contracts that got signed in back rooms with no witnesses. People called him a businessman. People who knew better called him something else. He walked down the aisle with the kind of confidence that didn't ask for permission. His shoes made no sound on the marble, but every step felt like it landed with weight. The guests pulled back instinctively, like his presence took up more space than his body. Seren watched him come closer, her breath shallow, her mind spinning through 100 different disasters, and not one of them included this. He stopped 3 feet from the altar, close enough that she could see the faint scar cutting through his left eyebrow, the shadow of stubble along his jaw, the way his eyes moved over her face like he was cataloging every detail. They were dark. Not brown. Something deeper. The kind of dark that didn't give anything away. Miss Ashford? His voice was low, controlled, the kind that didn't need to be loud to make people listen. Serene opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Her mind had gone blank, wiped clean by the sheer unreality of the moment. He glanced past her, toward the officiant, then back. My brother isn't coming. The words landed like stones in water. Behind her, the whispers exploded into full voices, gasps, the scrape of chairs as people stood. Seren felt the ground tilt beneath her heels. Her mother made a sound, something between a sob and a gasp. Her father shot to his feet, face red, fists clenched. What the hell is this? Robert Ashford's voice cracked across the church. Where's Tyler? Dante didn't look at him. His eyes stayed on Seren, and for a moment she thought she saw something flicker there. Pity, maybe. Or calculation. He got cold feet, Dante said, still talking to her like they were the only two people in the room. Left the country this morning. Didn't leave a note. Seren's knees buckled. She caught herself on the altar rail, her bouquet slipping from her fingers and hitting the floor with a soft, final sound. The roses scattered. One of the bridesmaids gasped. Someone in the back of the church laughed again, louder this time, and it spread like fire. Oh my God! She's been left at the altar. The Ashfords are finished. Her mother was crying now. Her father was shouting, pushing past guests, his face twisted with rage and humiliation. The officiant backed away, hands raised like he wanted no part of this. And Seren just stood there, frozen, her entire life collapsing in real time in front of 300 people with phones out, recording, posting, destroying what was left of her family's name with every passing second. That's when Dante moved. He stepped closer, into the space where Tyler should have been, and his voice dropped low enough that only she could hear it. You have a choice. Seren's head snapped up. Her vision blurred with unshed tears, but she could see him clearly, too clearly. The sharp line of his jaw, the scar, the absolute lack of fear in his expression. What? Her voice cracked. You can walk out of here right now, he said quietly, his eyes never leaving hers. Let them tear you apart. Let your family burn. Or... He paused, and something shifted in his face, something almost like amusement. You marry me instead. The world stopped. Seren stared at him, her breath caught somewhere between shock and disbelief. You're insane. Probably. He didn't deny it, didn't smile, didn't blink. But I'm also the only option you have left. I don't even know you. You know enough. His voice was calm, matter of fact, like he was discussing a business transaction and not a marriage. You know I can pay off your father's debts. You know I can make this embarrassment disappear. You know that if you say yes, no one will dare laugh at you again. Her hands were shaking. Her whole body was shaking. Why would you do this? For the first time, something like emotion crossed his face. It was gone in an instant, but she saw it, something darker, more complicated than pity. Because I need a wife, he said simply. And you need a way out. Behind them, her father was still shouting. The guests were louder now, the whispers turning into open conversation, phones flashing as people captured the disaster for social media. Seren felt the weight of it pressing down on her chest, suffocating her. In 5 minutes, this would be everywhere. By tonight, her name would be a punchline. By tomorrow, her family would be ruined. She looked at Dante Harrington, this man she didn't know, this man everyone feared, and made a choice that felt like stepping off a cliff in the dark. Yes! The word barely made it past her lips, but he heard it. She saw the shift in his posture, the way his shoulders relaxed just slightly, like he'd been holding his breath. He turned to the officiant, who stood frozen near the altar, eyes wide. You're still licensed to perform ceremonies, right? The officiant nodded, speechless. Good. Dante's voice carried now, cutting through the chaos. Then let's finish this. The church went silent. Every phone, every whisper, every shocked face turned toward the front. Seren felt like she was watching herself from somewhere far away, like this was happening to someone else. Dante reached out, took her hand, his grip warm and solid and completely unyielding, and pulled her gently back to the center of the altar. Her father pushed through the crowd, face purple with rage. You can't do this. You don't have the right. Dante looked at him. Just looked. And Robert Ashford stopped mid-sentence, the words dying in his throat. There was something in that gaze, something cold and absolute, that made it clear this wasn't a negotiation. "Your debts will be cleared by Monday," Dante said quietly. "Your reputation will be intact, and your daughter will be protected. Those are the terms. Do you accept them?" Robert Ashford's mouth opened and closed. His wife grabbed his arm, tears streaming down her face, and whispered something Seren couldn't hear. He looked at Seren, something broken in his expression, and then slowly he nodded. Dante turned back to the officiant. "Continue." The man fumbled with his book, hands trembling, and started reading. Seren barely heard the words. She was too aware of Dante's hand holding hers, of the way he stood beside her like a wall between her and the world, of the 300 guests staring in stunned silence. "Do you, Dante Harrington, take this woman?" "I do." He didn't wait for the rest, just said it, flat and final. The officiant swallowed and turned to Seren. "And do you, Seren Ashford?" "I do." Her voice was steadier than she expected. "Then by the power vested in me?" The officiant rushed through the rest like he was afraid someone would stop him. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." Dante didn't kiss her. He just slid a ring onto her finger, heavy, platinum, set with a diamond so large it felt obscene, and then turned to face the crowd. His hand stayed on hers, his grip firm, possessive. "It's done," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the church. "Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly." No one moved. No one spoke. Then slowly, someone started clapping. Seren didn't see who, but it spread, tentative at first, then louder, until the whole church was applauding, not out of joy but out of shock, out of the sheer inability to process what had just happened. Dante led her down the aisle, his hand on the small of her back, his body angled slightly in front of hers like he was shielding her from something. The guests parted, phones flashed, people whispered, but no one laughed. The doors opened and sunlight poured in, blinding after the dim interior of the church. A black car waited at the curb, sleek, expensive, windows tinted so dark she couldn't see inside. A man in a suit stood by the rear door, face blank, posture military straight. Dante opened the door himself and gestured for her to get in. Seren hesitated, one foot on the curb, the other in her old life. Then she ducked inside, the leather cool against her bare shoulders, and Dante slid in beside her. The door closed. The locks clicked. And just like that, Seren Ashford, now Seren Harrington, left behind everything she knew. The car moved through the city in silence. Seren sat pressed against the far window, her wedding dress pooling around her legs, her breath fogging the glass. She watched the streets blur past, familiar neighborhoods giving way to unfamiliar ones, the buildings getting taller, newer, more expensive. Dante sat on the opposite side, one arm stretched across the back of the seat, phone in his other hand, typing something with his thumb. He hadn't looked at her since they got in the car. She tried to make sense of what had just happened, tried to rewind the last hour and find the moment where everything tipped sideways. But it was all a blur. Tyler's absence, the whispers, Dante walking through those doors like he'd planned this all along. "Where are we going?" Her voice sounded small in the enclosed space. "Home." He didn't look up from his phone. "Your home." "Our home," he corrected her without inflection. "You're my wife now. That means you live where I live." The word, wife, landed wrong in her chest. Too big, too real. "I don't have any of my things. They'll be sent for." "I didn't agree to—" "You agreed to marry me." Now he looked at her, his dark eyes meeting hers with that same unreadable intensity. Everything else follows from that. Seren's hands twisted in her lap. "I don't understand why you did this. What do you get out of it? Does it matter?" "Yes." He studied her for a long moment, then slid his phone into his pocket. "My father's will has a clause. To inherit full control of the family businesses, I need to be married by my 35th birthday. That's in 6 days. Seren blinked. "So this was just convenient?" "Convenient for both of us." He leaned back, his expression giving nothing away. "You needed a way out. I needed a wife. Now we both have what we need." I needed time to think, not a stranger. You had time. You spent it standing at that altar waiting for a man who wasn't coming. His voice wasn't cruel, just factual. I gave you a choice. You made it. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was wrong, that she'd been in shock, that this didn't count. But the ring on her finger was real. The marriage license the officiant had signed was real, and the look on her father's face when Dante promised to clear the debts, that was real too. The car turned off the main road and passed through a set of iron gates that opened automatically. Seren sat up straighter, pressing her face closer to the window. The driveway stretched ahead, lined with trees that looked like they'd been planted a century ago, their branches forming a canopy overhead. Then the house came into view. It wasn't a house. It was an estate. 3 stories of stone and glass, wings extending on either side of a central entrance. Balconies overlooking manicured gardens that seemed to stretch forever. Fountains. Hedges trimmed into geometric perfection. Lights glowing in windows, even though it was still afternoon. The car stopped in front of the main entrance. The driver got out and opened Dante's door first, then circled around to hers. She stepped out onto pale gravel, her heels sinking slightly, and stared up at the building that was apparently her new home. She didn't have words. Excessive, Dante finished for her. He came around the car, hands in his pockets. My grandfather built it. My father expanded it. I mostly just keep the lights on. A woman appeared in the doorway, older, maybe 60, dressed in a simple black dress with her gray hair pulled into a neat bun. She smiled when she saw Dante, but her eyes went wide when she saw Seren in her wedding dress. Sir, we weren't expecting. Plans changed, Maria. Dante gestured toward Seren. This is my wife. She'll need the east wing prepared. Her things will arrive later tonight. Maria's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. Your wife? Is there a problem? No, sir. Of course not. Maria recovered quickly, her professional mask sliding back into place. Welcome, Mrs. Harrington. I'll have everything ready within the hour. Mrs. Harrington. Seren felt the name settle over her like a coat that didn't fit. Dante started toward the entrance. Seren followed, her dress whispering against the gravel, her mind still trying to catch up. Inside, the house was even more overwhelming. Marble floors, a staircase that curved upward like something out of a museum, chandeliers that looked like they cost more than her parents' house. Maria runs the household, Dante said, walking through the foyer without pausing. Anything you need, ask her. The staff will stay out of your way unless you call for them. You have full access to the property, but the west wing is off limits. That's where I work. Seren hurried to keep up, her heels clicking against the marble. What kind of work? The kind that pays for all of this. That's not an answer. He stopped at the base of the staircase and turned to face her. For the first time since they'd left the church, his expression shifted, something almost like amusement flickering across his face. You're going to ask a lot of questions, aren't you? I just married a complete stranger. Yes, I'm going to ask questions. Fair enough. He started up the stairs. But don't expect answers to all of them. The east wing turned out to be an entire floor. Bedroom, sitting room, bathroom, the size of her childhood bedroom, walk-in closet that was currently empty except for a few robes and slippers that Maria must have placed there in the last 10 minutes. The bedroom had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gardens, a bed large enough for 4 people, and furniture that looked like it had been curated by someone with too much money and too much taste. Dante stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, watching her take it all in. This is temporary, Seren said, turning to face him. Right? This whole arrangement. Once you inherit, we can… Divorce? He said the word like it was a term from a contract he was negotiating. Maybe. Depends on the terms of the will. My lawyers are still working through it. So I'm just stuck here. You're protected here, he corrected her, his voice firm. Your family's debts will be cleared. Your name will be attached to mine, which means no one will touch you. And in exchange, you play the role of my wife in public. That's the deal. I didn't agree to the… You said yes at the altar. He cut her off, not unkindly. Everything else is just details. Seren wanted to scream, wanted to throw something, wanted to wake up and discover this was all some kind of stress-induced nightmare. But Dante was already turning away, his hand on the doorframe. Get some rest, he said. We have a dinner tomorrow night. Important people. You'll need to look the part. What part? He glanced back over his shoulder, and for just a second she saw something in his eyes, something that looked almost like regret. The part of a woman who chose this. Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him, and Seren was alone in a room too big, in a house too cold, wearing a wedding dress meant for a different groom. She sank onto the edge of the bed and finally let herself cry. The next morning, Seren woke to sunlight streaming through windows she didn't recognize. For a moment, one blissful, confused moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then she saw the ring on her finger, heavy and unfamiliar, and everything came crashing back. She was married to Dante Harrington, and she lived here now. A soft knock at the door made her sit up, pulling the sheets around herself, even though she was still fully dressed in the slip she'd changed into last night after finally getting out of the wedding dress. Come in, Maria entered, carrying a tray. Good morning, Mrs. Harrington. I thought you might like breakfast. You didn't have to. It's no trouble. Maria set the tray on the small table by the window. Coffee, toast, fruit, eggs that looked perfectly prepared. Your things arrived late last night. I've had them unpacked and put away. If anything isn't to your liking, just let me know. Seren stared at the tray, at Maria's kind, weathered face, at the normalcy of it all. Thank you. Maria hesitated at the door. He's not as bad as people say, you know. Seren looked up. What? Mr. Harrington. Maria's voice was gentle. People talk. They make him out to be a monster. But I've worked for this family for 30 years, and I've never seen him hurt anyone who didn't deserve it. That's not exactly reassuring. Maria smiled faintly. No, I suppose it isn't. But he's fair, and he protects what's his. She paused. You're his now. That means something. Before Seren could respond, Maria left, closing the door softly behind her. Seren ate breakfast by the window, watching gardeners move through the grounds below, and tried to figure out what the hell she was supposed to do next. The answer came at noon, when Maria returned with a garment bag. For tonight, she explained, hanging it in the closet, Mr. Harrington asked that you wear this to dinner. Seren unzipped the bag slowly. Inside was a dress, deep emerald green silk, cut in a style that was elegant without being flashy, expensive, the kind of thing she would have stared at in store windows and never imagined owning. Who's going to be at this dinner? Business associates, Maria said carefully. Important ones. Mr. Harrington wants to make it clear that you're, part of the family now. Part of the family, Seren repeated. I've been his wife for less than 24 hours. Yes, ma'am. But in his world, that's all the time it takes. The dinner was held in a private room at a restaurant Seren had only read about in magazines, the kind of place where reservations required connections, not just money. Dante picked her up at 7, dressed in another perfectly tailored suit, this one charcoal gray. He looked her over when she came down the stairs in the green dress, his expression unreadable. You'll do, he said. High praise. Something that might have been amusement flickered in his eyes. You look beautiful. Better? Marginally. The restaurant was all dark wood and low lighting, private booths separated by frosted glass. A server led them to a table in the back where 2 men were already waiting, both older, both wearing suits that probably cost more than a car, both watching Dante with the kind of deference that made Seren's skin prickle. Gentlemen, Dante said, his hand moving to the small of Seren's back. This is my wife, Seren. Both men stood. The taller one, silver hair, sharp eyes, extended his hand. Mrs. Harrington, Marcus Delacroix. It's a pleasure. Seren shook his hand, trying to match his firm grip. Likewise. The second man, shorter, with glasses and a nervous smile, nodded. James Chen, congratulations on the wedding. Thank you. Seren let Dante guide her into her seat, hyper-aware of his hand lingering on her shoulder before he sat beside her. The conversation started with small talk, business, property, investments. Seren stayed quiet, watching the way Dante navigated the discussion with the ease of someone who'd been doing this his whole life. He never raised his voice, never made threats, but both men listened to every word like their lives depended on it. I heard your brother left the country, Marcus said casually, cutting into his steak. Unfortunate timing. Dante's expression didn't change. Tyler's decisions are his own. Of course. Marcus glanced at Seren, something calculating in his gaze. Though I imagine it worked out well for you. Convenient, getting married just before the deadline. The air at the table shifted. Seren felt Dante tense beside her, though his face remained perfectly calm. My marriage isn't a business arrangement, Marcus, Dante said quietly. It's personal. Naturally, Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I only meant that the timing was fortunate. Your father's will is quite specific about the inheritance requirements, after all. Seren's stomach dropped. She looked at Dante, but he was focused entirely on Marcus now, his jaw tight. My father's will is none of your concern. Of course not. I was simply making conversation. Marcus took a sip of his wine. Though I'm sure Mrs. Harrington understands the family she's married into. The expectations, the responsibilities. Seren forced herself to smile, even though her heart was pounding. I'm learning. Good. Marcus set down his glass. Because in our world, loyalty is everything, and marriages built on practicality sometimes lack that foundation. Dante's hand moved under the table, finding hers. His grip was firm, grounding, and when he spoke, his voice was ice. My wife's loyalty isn't something you need to question. The table went silent. James Chen looked like he wanted to disappear. Marcus held Dante's gaze for a long moment, then smiled. A real smile this time, though there was something predatory in it. Of course not. My apologies if I overstepped. The rest of the dinner passed in tense small talk. By the time they left, Seren felt wrung out, exhausted from holding her composure. Dante didn't speak until they were in the car, the doors closed, the city lights sliding past the windows. I'm sorry, he said quietly. Seren looked at him, surprised. For what? For Marcus. He was testing you. Testing us. Why? Because people in my world don't believe in things like love or choice. They believe in power and leverage. He turned to face her, his expression softer than she'd seen it. He wanted to see if you were a weakness. You're not. How do you know? Because you didn't flinch. His voice was almost admiring. You sat there and played the role perfectly. Most people would have cracked. Seren looked down at their hands, still joined, his thumb moving absently over her knuckles. Is that all this is? A role? Dante didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was careful, measured. For now. It wasn't the answer she wanted, but it was honest. And somehow, that mattered more. When they got home, Dante walked her to her door, a strange, formal gesture that felt out of place after the intimacy of the car ride. He stopped in the hallway, hands in his pockets, looking at her like he was trying to figure out a puzzle he hadn't been given all the pieces to. You did well tonight, he said. Thanks. Seren hesitated, her hand on the doorframe. Can I ask you something? You can ask, I might not answer. Why didn't you just hire someone, an actress, someone who knew how to play this game? Dante's expression shifted, something unguarded flickering across his face before he locked it down again. Because I didn't want someone playing a role, he said quietly. I wanted... He trailed off, and for a moment Seren thought he might actually tell her the truth. But then he stepped back, the walls going up again. Get some rest. We have another dinner next week. He left before she could respond, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. Seren stood in her doorway, watching him disappear into the west wing, and wondered what he'd been about to say, and why it felt like it mattered. The first week passed in a blur of dinners and introductions, each one more calculated than the last. Seren learned quickly that being Dante's wife meant being on display, at charity galas where women in diamonds whispered behind their champagne flutes, at business lunches where men in expensive suits watched her like she was a piece on a chessboard they hadn't figured out how to use yet. She smiled, she nodded. She wore the dresses that appeared in her closet like magic, and learned to navigate conversations that were really negotiations in disguise. And through it all, Dante was there. Not warm, exactly. Not affectionate in any way that felt real, but present. His hand on her back when they walked into a room. His voice cutting through a conversation when someone pushed too far. His car always waiting, his staff always ready, his world wrapping around her like armor she hadn't asked for, but desperately needed. She should have felt grateful. She did feel grateful, but she also felt like she was suffocating. On the 8th morning, Saren woke to find an envelope slid under her door. Inside was a black credit card with her name embossed in silver, Saren Harrington, and a handwritten note in sharp, precise handwriting. For whatever you need, no limit. D. She stared at the card for a long time, turning it over in her hands. It felt heavy, like a gift and a leash at the same time. Maria knocked and entered with breakfast as usual, her smile warm but careful. Mr. Harrington left early this morning. He said he won't be back until late tonight. Where did he go? Business in the city. Maria set down the tray. Coffee, croissants, fresh berries. He asked me to remind you that Mrs. Castellano is coming by at 2 for your dress fitting. Seren had forgotten about that. Another event, another performance. This one was some kind of foundation gala that Dante had mentioned in passing, like it was something she should have already known about. What's the gala for? Children's Hospital, I believe. Very prestigious. All the important families attend. Maria smoothed the tablecloth unnecessarily. Mrs. Castellano is the best. She's dressed every society woman in the city at some point. Great, Seren muttered, poking at a strawberry. Can't wait. Maria hesitated, then sat down across from her, an informal gesture that surprised Seren enough to look up. May I speak freely, ma'am? Please. And stop calling me ma'am. It makes me feel like I'm 80. Maria smiled faintly. You're adjusting well. Better than most would. I don't feel like I'm adjusting. I feel like I'm pretending. That's what adjusting is at first. Maria's voice was gentle. You put on the dress, you smile, you learn the steps. Eventually, it stops feeling like pretending. Does it? Seren set down her fork. Because right now it feels like I'm playing dress-up in someone else's life. You are, Maria said simply. But that doesn't mean it can't become yours. Before Seren could respond, Maria stood and smoothed her apron. Mrs. Castellano will be here in a few hours. I'd suggest the blue sitting room. The light is better there. Mrs. Castellano turned out to be a tiny Italian woman in her 70s with silver hair pulled into a severe bun and an eye for detail that bordered on terrifying. She arrived with 2 assistants, both carrying garment bags and boxes, and proceeded to transform the sitting room into a makeshift atelier. So you are the one, Mrs. Castellano said, circling Seren like a hawk evaluating prey. She spoke with a thick accent, her words clipped and precise. The girl who married Dante Harrington in a church with no warning. Very dramatic. It wasn't exactly planned, Seren said. Nothing about that man is planned. Everything is controlled. Mrs. Castellano snapped her fingers, and one of her assistants produced a measuring tape. Arms up. Seren obeyed, letting the woman measure her waist, her hips, her shoulders. It felt invasive and impersonal at the same time. You're too thin, Mrs. Castellano announced. But we work with what we have. The gala is in 5 days. I will make you something that makes people forget you were ever standing at that altar alone. I'd rather they just forgot about it entirely. They won't. So we give them something better to talk about. Mrs. Castellano stepped back, eyeing her critically. Emerald green, I think. It suits you, and it will match your eyes when you are angry. I'm not angry. Not yet. Mrs. Castellano smiled, sharp and knowing. But you will be. Women married to men like Dante always are, eventually. The comment landed wrong, and Seren felt her defenses rise. You don't know anything about my marriage. I know he bought you a dress worth more than most people's cars for a dinner last week. I know he had your ring custom made in less than 12 hours. I know he cleared your family's debts before the ink was dry on the marriage certificate. Mrs. Castellano's expression softened slightly. I know he is trying, whether you see it or not. Seren didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know if it was true or if this woman was just good at reading situations and telling people what they wanted to hear. Mrs. Castellano clapped her hands. Enough talk. We have work to do. The fitting took 2 hours. By the time Mrs. Castellano and her assistants left, Seren was exhausted and more confused than ever. She wandered through the house, trying to shake the restlessness that had been building all week. The east wing felt too big, too empty. The gardens were beautiful, but sterile. Everything in this place was perfect. and that perfection made her feel like she didn't belong. She found herself walking toward the West Wing, the part of the house Dante had told her was off limits. She wasn't planning to go in, just wanted to see what the door looked like, maybe. Test the boundaries of this gilded cage she'd agreed to. The hallway was quieter here, the floors covered in thick carpet that muffled her footsteps. There were fewer windows, fewer decorations, just closed doors and the faint hum of something electronic behind one of them. She stopped in front of the door at the end of the hall. No sign, no nameplate, just dark wood and a keypad lock that glowed faintly red. Looking for something? Seren spun around, heart hammering. Dante stood at the other end of the hallway, jacket slung over one shoulder, tie loose around his neck. He looked tired. Actually tired, not just the controlled exhaustion he usually projected. There were shadows under his eyes, and his hair was messier than she'd ever seen it. "I thought you weren't coming back until late," she said, her voice coming out more defensive than she meant it to. "I wasn't planning to." He walked toward her, his footsteps silent on the carpet. "Meeting ended early." "Lucky me." He stopped a few feet away, his eyes flicking to the door behind her, then back to her face. "I told you the West Wing was off limits. I wasn't going in. I was just walking. Past a locked door, in a hallway you have no reason to be in." His voice wasn't angry, just matter of fact. "If you want to explore, there are 30 other rooms you're welcome to." "Maybe I don't want to be welcome. Maybe I want to know what you're hiding." Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe. Or respect. "I'm not hiding anything. I'm protecting you." "From what?" "From parts of my life that you don't need to see." Seren crossed her arms. "You mean the parts that are illegal?" "I mean the parts that are dangerous." He stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to look at him. "You think you want the truth. You think you want to know everything. But trust me, you don't." "Don't tell me what I want. Then stop pushing into places you're not ready for." They stared at each other, the tension crackling in the space between them. Seren's heart was racing, though she couldn't tell if it was from anger or something else, something more complicated. "I didn't ask for this," she said quietly. "Any of this. I didn't ask to be your wife or live in this house or pretend to be someone I'm not." "I know." His voice softened, just slightly. "But you said yes anyway. That means something." "It means I was desperate. It means you're stronger than you think." He reached out, his hand hovering near her face for a moment before he seemed to think better of it and dropped it. "You've handled everything I've thrown at you, the dinners, the questions, the people trying to tear you down. You haven't broken yet." "Yet," Seren repeated. "That's reassuring. I'm not trying to break you. I'm trying to protect you." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration creeping into his voice. "Do you think I wanted this to be complicated? I offered you a way out, and you took it. The rest is just details." "These details feel pretty important." "They're not." He said it with such certainty that it startled her. "What's important is that you're safe. Your family is safe. No one can touch you now. Because I belong to you. Because you're mine." He corrected her, and the possessiveness in his tone made something twist in her chest. "And I take care of what's mine." Before she could respond, his phone buzzed. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and his expression hardened. "I have to take this." He stepped past her, typing in the code on the keypad. She caught a glimpse of the numbers, 7419, before the door opened. "Stay out of the West Wing, Seren. I mean it." Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a soft click and the lock turning red again. Seren stood alone in the hallway, her pulse still racing, and wondered what the hell she'd gotten herself into. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in the too big bed in the too quiet room and stared at the ceiling, replaying the conversation in her head. The way Dante had looked at her, the way he'd said "you're mine," like it was a fact, not a claim. At midnight, she gave up and went downstairs to find something to eat. The kitchen was massive, all stainless steel and marble countertops, and she felt ridiculous standing there in silk pajamas rifling through a refrigerator the size of her childhood bedroom. "Can't sleep?" She jumped, spinning around. Dante stood in the doorway, barefoot, wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt, the most casual she'd ever seen him. He looked almost human like this, almost approachable. "I didn't think anyone else was awake," she said. "I don't sleep much." He crossed to the cabinet and pulled out 2 glasses. Whiskey? I don't drink whiskey. You do now. He poured 2 fingers into each glass and slid one across the counter to her. Trust me, it helps. Seren picked up the glass, sniffed it, and took a tentative sip. It burned going down, but there was something warm and grounding about it. Better? Dante leaned against the counter, his own glass cradled in his hand. Different. They stood in silence for a moment, the only sound the hum of the refrigerator and the distant tick of a clock somewhere in the house. I'm sorry, Dante said finally, for earlier. I shouldn't have been so harsh. Seren looked at him, surprised. You're apologizing? Don't sound so shocked. I'm capable of it. He took a drink. I know this isn't easy for you. I know you didn't choose this life, but I need you to trust that I'm doing what's best. Best for who? For both of us. He set down his glass. The gala on Saturday. It's important. A lot of people are going to be watching, judging, trying to figure out if this marriage is real or if it's just a business arrangement. It is a business arrangement. To them, it can't be. His eyes met hers, serious and intent. If they think you're just here for the money or the name, they'll eat you alive. You need to make them believe you chose this, that you want to be here. How am I supposed to do that? By staying close to me, by not flinching when I touch you, by looking at me like... He stopped, something flickering in his expression. Like you don't hate me. I don't hate you. You don't trust me either. Can you blame me? Seren set down her glass. You won't tell me anything about your work, about your life, about why you really married me. You just keep saying it's to protect me, but from what? Dante was quiet for a long moment. Then he pushed off the counter and walked to the window, staring out at the dark gardens. My father built an empire, he said quietly. Legal businesses on the surface, hotels, real estate, tech investments, but underneath there was always something else. Money laundering, protection rackets, deals made in back rooms with people who don't show up on any board of directors. He kept it separate, clean on one side, dirty on the other. And when he died, it all came to me. Seren listened, her heart beating faster. I've spent the last 5 years trying to legitimize everything, Dante continued, cutting ties with the worst of it, building something that won't get me killed or thrown in prison. But there are people who don't want that, people who profit from the old ways, and they're watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. What does that have to do with me? Everything. He turned to face her. The will requires me to be married to inherit full control. Without that, the board can vote to split the assets, which means the people who want to keep things dirty get their hands on half of everything I've been trying to clean up. Marrying you wasn't just about meeting a deadline. It was about consolidating power before they could take it from me. Seren felt the weight of it settling over her. So I'm a pawn. No. He crossed back to her, his voice firm. Your protection. For me, yes, but also for you. Because the moment you became my wife, you became untouchable. No one will hurt you, no one will threaten you, because they know what I'll do if they try. And what will you do? His eyes went cold. Whatever it takes. The words should have scared her. Maybe they did. But there was something else there too, something that felt almost like safety, even if it came wrapped in violence. I need to know you understand, Dante said, stepping closer. This isn't just about us. It's bigger than that. And if you can't handle it, if you want out, tell me now, and I'll find another way. Seren looked at him, really looked at him. At the tension in his shoulders, the exhaustion in his eyes, the way he held himself like he was bracing for her to run. And she realized that for all his power, all his control, he was asking her to stay. I'm not going anywhere, she said quietly. But I need you to stop treating me like I'm fragile. If I'm in this, I'm in it, all of it. Something shifted in his expression, relief, maybe, or something deeper. Okay, he said. No more locked doors. I didn't say that. He almost smiled. One step at a time, then. They stood there in the kitchen, the space between them feeling smaller than it had before, and Seren wondered if this was what trust felt like when it was just starting to grow. The next few days passed in a strange new rhythm. Dante started joining her for breakfast. Not every morning, but enough that it began to feel normal. He asked her questions about her childhood, her family, the things she used to want before everything fell apart. And slowly, carefully, he started answering hers. She learned that he'd grown up in this house but hated it, that his father had been cruel in quiet ways, never violent, just cold, demanding, impossible to please, that his mother had left when he was 12 and never looked back, that Tyler had always been the favorite, the golden child who could do no wrong, while Dante was expected to be the enforcer, the protector, the one who fixed problems without asking questions. "Did you love him?" Seren asked one morning, poking at her eggs. "Your father." Dante considered the question, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. "I respected him, feared him sometimes. But love?" He shook his head. "I don't think he wanted to be loved. He wanted to be obeyed." "That's sad. It's practical." He set down his cup. "Love makes you weak. It gives people leverage. Is that why you don't let anyone close?" He looked at her, something unreadable in his eyes. "I let you close. I'm your wife. That's different." "Is it?" The question hung in the air between them, and Seren didn't know how to answer it. The day of the gala arrived faster than she expected. Mrs. Castellano delivered the dress herself, emerald green silk that fit like it had been painted on, with a neckline that was daring without being scandalous, and a slit up one leg that made her feel powerful and exposed at the same time. "You wear this, and no one will remember the wedding," Mrs. Castellano said, adjusting the shoulders with a critical eye. "They will only see you now, Mrs. Harrington, Dante's wife, untouchable." Maria helped her with her hair and makeup, keeping it simple but elegant. Soft waves, dark lips, just enough to make her look polished without feeling like a stranger in the mirror. When she came downstairs, Dante was waiting in the foyer. He wore a tuxedo that fit him so perfectly it had to have been custom-made, his hair swept back, his expression unreadable. But when he saw her, something shifted in his face. His eyes traveled from her heels to the dress to her face, and for a moment he just stared. "You look—" He stopped, cleared his throat. "Good. You look good." "Just good?" "Dangerous." He offered his arm. "Ready?" "No, but I'll pretend." That's all anyone does at these things. The gala was held at a historic hotel downtown, the kind of place with chandeliers the size of cars and ballrooms that could hold 500 people comfortably. Seren's nerves kicked in the moment they walked through the doors, cameras flashing, voices rising as people turned to stare. Dante's hand found the small of her back, steady and grounding, and she forced herself to smile. "Remember," he murmured, his lips close to her ear. "You belong here. Act like it." They moved through the crowd, Dante stopping every few feet to shake hands, introduce her, exchange pleasantries that sounded friendly but felt like coded negotiations. Seren smiled until her cheeks hurt, nodded in all the right places, and tried not to think about how many people were watching her every move. She was talking to a woman in diamonds about some charity project when she saw him. Tyler. He stood across the ballroom, champagne in hand, talking to a blonde woman Seren didn't recognize. He looked the same, too handsome, too smooth, too comfortable in his own skin. And when his eyes met hers, he smiled. Seren's blood turned to ice. Dante felt her tense, his hand tightened on her waist, his body shifting slightly in front of hers. "What is it?" "He's here," she breathed. "Tyler's here." Dante followed her gaze, and his entire demeanor changed. The polished businessman disappeared, replaced by something colder, harder, dangerous. "Stay here," he said quietly. "Dante, stay. Here." He crossed the ballroom in long, purposeful strides, and Seren watched helplessly as he reached Tyler. She couldn't hear what they said, but she saw Tyler's smile falter, saw Dante lean in close, his voice low and controlled. The blonde woman backed away nervously. People nearby started to notice, conversations dying as they turned to watch. Then Tyler laughed, loud enough to carry across the room, and clapped Dante on the shoulder like they were old friends. "Brother," Tyler's voice rang out, "congratulations on stealing my bride. I have to admit, I didn't think you had it in you." The room went silent. Dante's expression didn't change, but Serene saw his hands curl into fists at his sides. "You abandoned her," Dante said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You don't get to call her anything." "Abandoned?" Tyler's smile widened. "I set her free. Did her a favor, really. She would have been miserable with me. With you, though." He looked past Dante to where Saren stood frozen. "With you, she gets the whole package. Money, power, protection. All she had to do was say yes when you showed up to play hero." Saren felt every eye in the room turn to her, felt the judgment, the speculation, the gossip already spreading like wildfire. Dante moved before she could process what was happening. One moment he was standing still, the next his fist connected with Tyler's jaw with a crack that echoed through the ballroom. Tyler stumbled back, blood blooming at the corner of his mouth, shock replacing his smug expression. "You had your chance," Dante said, his voice cold as winter. "You walked away. She's mine now. And if you ever speak to her or about her again, I'll make sure you regret it for the rest of your life." Security was already moving toward them, but Dante didn't wait. He turned, crossed back to Seren, and took her hand. "We're leaving," he said. "Dante, you just... now." He pulled her through the crowd, past the staring faces and the whispers, past the cameras already uploading to social media. The car was waiting outside, and they got in without a word. The driver pulled away from the curb, and only then did Seren realize she was shaking. "Are you okay?" Dante asked, his voice gentler now. "You hit him." "Yes?" "In front of everyone." "Yes." "You just made this whole thing worse." Dante turned to face her, his eyes fierce. "I don't care. He had no right to talk about you like that. No right to make you feel small. I don't care who sees or what they say. No one disrespects you. Not while I'm breathing." Seren stared at him, her heart pounding. "Why? Why what? Why do you care so much? If this is just an arrangement, if I'm just here to help you inherit, why does it matter what he says?" Dante was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached out and cupped her face in his hand, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. "Because you're not just an arrangement," he said quietly. "You haven't been for a while now." The words hung between them in the darkness of the car, and Seren felt like the ground had shifted beneath her without warning. Dante's hand was still on her face, his touch warm and impossibly gentle for a man who'd just broken his brother's jaw in front of half the city's elite. "What do you mean?" Her voice came out smaller than she intended. He pulled his hand back slowly, like he was reluctant to break the contact. "Exactly what I said. That doesn't explain anything." "I know." He leaned back against the seat, running both hands through his hair. The carefully controlled facade was cracking, and she could see the tension underneath. "I'm not good at this." "At what?" "Talking, explaining, any of it." He looked at her, frustration written across his face. "I'm good at making decisions, solving problems, eliminating threats. But this..." He gestured between them. "I don't know how to do this." Saren's heart was beating too fast. "Then just tell me the truth. Why did you really marry me?" Dante was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. The car turned onto the long driveway leading to the estate, headlights cutting through the darkness. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough, unsteady. "I saw you 6 months ago, at some fundraiser my father dragged me to before he died. You were there with your parents, wearing this blue dress, looking like you wanted to be anywhere else." He shook his head. "You don't remember. Why would you? I was just another suit in the crowd." "But I remembered you." Seren tried to recall the event, but her memories of those months were a blur of desperate socializing, her father's increasingly frantic attempts to network their way out of debt. "I asked around," Dante continued, "found out your family was struggling, found out you were engaged to my idiot brother. And I told myself it was none of my business, that you'd made your choice." His jaw tightened. Then that morning, the wedding morning, Tyler called me, told me he couldn't go through with it, that he'd met someone else, that he was leaving the country, that he didn't care what happened to you or your family or any of it. "So you stepped in." "So I saw a chance." He looked at her directly now, his eyes dark and intense. "I told myself it was practical, that I needed a wife anyway, that this solved 2 problems at once, but that wasn't the whole truth." "What was the whole truth?" that I'd wanted you from the moment I saw you, and I took the opening Tyler gave me because I'm selfish and I don't play fair when I want something. The confession hit her like a physical blow. Seren couldn't breathe, couldn't think past the sudden rush of emotions she didn't know how to name. "You should have told me," she said finally. "Why?" "So you could feel trapped in a different way." His voice was bitter. "At least the lie gave you the illusion of choice." "It wasn't a lie. It was just not the complete truth." "That's what a lie is." The car stopped in front of the house. The driver got out, but neither of them moved. Seren stared at her hands, at the ring that suddenly felt heavier than it had a moment ago. "I need time," she said quietly, "to think about this, about what it means." "Take all the time you need." Dante reached for the door handle. "But for what it's worth, I meant what I said in there. You're not just an arrangement, not to me." He got out and walked toward the house without looking back, leaving Seren alone in the car with her thoughts spinning out of control. She didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed replaying the conversation, trying to separate what she felt from what she thought she should feel. Dante had wanted her, had married her not just for convenience, but because he'd seen her at some party she didn't even remember and decided she was worth pursuing. It should have felt romantic. Instead, it felt manipulative, calculated. But wasn't that just who he was? A man who saw opportunities and took them, who played chess while everyone else was still learning checkers? By morning, she was exhausted and no closer to clarity. Maria brought breakfast as usual, her expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Harrington asked me to tell you he'll be in the city all day," Maria said, setting down the tray. "He said to call if you need anything." "Is he avoiding me?" Maria's lips twitched into something that might have been a smile. "I think he's giving you space. There's a difference." After Maria left, Serene forced herself to eat, then spent the rest of the morning wandering the estate. She found herself in the library, a room she'd only glimpsed before, all dark wood and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. There was a reading nook by the window with a worn leather chair that looked like it had actually been used, unlike most of the furniture in this house. She was reaching for a book when she noticed the photographs on the shelf. Family photos, she realized. Not the stiff, formal portraits that hung in the hallways, but real snapshots. A younger Dante, maybe 14 or 15, standing next to a man who must have been his father. Same dark eyes, same sharp features, but colder somehow. Tyler was in the photo too, grinning at the camera while Dante looked away. There was another photo of a woman, beautiful, dark-haired, laughing at something off camera. Dante's mother, probably. The one who'd left and never come back. She was good at leaving. Seren spun around. Dante stood in the doorway, still in the clothes he'd worn to the city, his tie loosened and his jacket slung over one shoulder. "I thought you were staying in the city all day," she said. "I changed my mind." He walked into the room, his eyes on the photograph in her hand. "That was taken a week before she left. My father had just closed some deal he'd been working on for months. We all went to dinner to celebrate. She smiled through the whole thing, ordered dessert, told us she loved us." He paused. 2 days later, she was gone. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. She made her choice. Can't blame someone for wanting out of this life." He set his jacket on the back of a chair. "I came back because we need to talk." Seren's stomach tightened. "About last night." "About Tyler." Dante's expression was grim. "He's not done. The stunt at the gala was just the opening move." "What do you mean?" "He's planning something. I don't know what yet, but I've been hearing things. People asking questions about our marriage, about whether it's legitimate, about your family's debts and the timing of everything." He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "He wants to prove this is fake, that you married me for money and I married you for the inheritance. If he can make that stick, he can challenge the will." "Can he do that?" "He can try. And if he tries, it gets messy. Lawyers, investigations, the press digging into every detail of our lives." Dante's jaw tightened. "I won't let him drag you through that." "So what do we do?" "We make it impossible to question." He looked at her, and there was something vulnerable in his expression that made her chest ache. "We make them believe this is real." "How?" "By stopping the pretending, by actually being married instead of just playing the part." Seren's breath caught. "What are you saying?" I'm saying we give this a real chance. No more separate wings, no more polite distance. We live like an actual couple. He stepped closer. I know I don't deserve it. I know I manipulated the situation and kept things from you, but I'm asking anyway. Give me a chance to do this right. And if I say no? Pain flickered across his face. Then I'll respect that. I'll keep my distance. We'll maintain the arrangement until the inheritance clears, and then you can decide if you want out. Seren looked at him, really looked at him. At the tension in his shoulders, the exhaustion in his eyes, the way he was holding himself like he was bracing for rejection. This man who terrified half the city, who'd built an empire on fear and control, was standing in front of her asking for something he couldn't take by force. I need honesty, she said finally. Complete honesty. No more secrets, no more half-truths. If we do this, you tell me everything. Everything, he agreed. And no more locked doors. If I'm your wife for real, I get to see all of it. The business, the deals, the parts you think are too dangerous. He hesitated, then nodded. Okay. And you stop making decisions for me. I'm not fragile. I'm not stupid. If something affects my life, I get a say in it. Fair enough. He was closer now, close enough that she could smell his cologne, see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. Anything else? Yeah. She looked up at him, her heart hammering. You tell me what you really want from this. From me. I already told you. I want you. That's not specific enough. Dante was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was raw. I want to come home and find you here. I want to have breakfast with you and hear about your day and know that you're choosing to stay. I want to stop sleeping in an empty bed thinking about you one floor away. He stopped, shaking his head. I want to stop pretending this is just business when it hasn't been for weeks. The confession stripped away the last of Seren's defenses. She'd been telling herself this was temporary, that she was just surviving until she could figure out an exit strategy. But the truth was, she'd stopped looking for exits. Somewhere between the dinners and the late-night conversations and the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, she'd started to care. Okay, she said quietly. Okay? Okay, we try. For real. She took a shaky breath. But if you lie to me again, if you keep things from me because you think you're protecting me, we're done. I mean it. I won't. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away and cupped her face in his hands. I promise. Then he kissed her. It wasn't their first kiss. They'd had a brief, awkward press of lips at the altar, more for show than anything else. But this was different. This was real. His mouth was warm and sure against hers, and when she kissed him back, she felt him exhale like he'd been holding his breath for weeks. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Dante rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that since the wedding, he admitted. Then why didn't you? Because I was terrified you'd push me away. Seren laughed, the sound shaky and a little wild. You're scared of me. Terrified, he said again. You have no idea how much power you have over me. Good. She kissed him again, harder this time. Keep that in mind. The next few weeks felt like living in a different world. Dante moved her things into his wing, the master suite that was 3 times the size of the room she'd been staying in, with windows overlooking the gardens and a bed big enough for both of them. It felt strange at first, intimate in ways she hadn't expected. Sharing a bathroom, watching him get ready for work in the morning, falling asleep to the sound of his breathing, but it also felt right. They started having dinner together every night, just the 2 of them in the smaller dining room instead of the formal one. Dante asked about her day, and she started asking about his. He explained his businesses, the legitimate ones and the gray areas he was still trying to clean up. She told him about the charities she was getting involved with, the people she'd met, the things she wanted to do with the platform being his wife had given her. You're good at this, he said one night, refilling her wine glass. The society thing, making connections. I had a good teacher. My mother spent years coaching me on how to network. Seren took a sip. Of course, she was doing it to help my father's business, not realizing I'd end up using it to navigate the criminal underworld. Former criminal underworld, Dante corrected. I'm very respectable now. You punched your brother at a charity gala 3 weeks ago. He deserved it. No hesitation, no regret. Seren laughed and Dante smiled, a real smile, the kind that made him look younger, less burdened. "I like that sound," he said. "What sound?" "You laughing. You don't do it enough. Maybe you should give me more reasons to." He stood, walked around the table, and pulled her to her feet. Challenge accepted. Life settled into a rhythm that almost felt normal. Dante still worked long hours, still disappeared into the West Wing for meetings she wasn't allowed to attend. But he came to bed every night, and more often than not, she'd wake up to find him already awake, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What?" she asked one morning, catching him staring. "Nothing. Just making sure you're real. Still here?" "Good." He pulled her closer, his arm tightening around her waist. "Let's keep it that way." But the peace didn't last. Tyler resurfaced on a Tuesday afternoon, and this time he brought lawyers. Seren was in the garden when Maria came rushing out, her face pale. "Mrs. Harrington, you need to come inside. There are people here to see Mr. Harrington, and he asked for you." She found Dante in his office, the one in the West Wing she'd never been allowed in before. It was exactly what she'd expected. Dark wood, expensive furniture, walls lined with filing cabinets, and monitors showing security feeds from around the property. 3 men in suits sat across from Dante's desk, briefcases open, documents spread out. And standing by the window, looking smug, was Tyler. "Seren," Dante said, his voice tight. "These gentlemen are from Crawford and Associates. They're representing Tyler in a challenge to our father's will." "On what grounds?" Seren's voice was steadier than she felt. One of the lawyers, older, gray-haired, with the dead eyes of someone who'd spent his career finding loopholes, cleared his throat. "On the grounds that your marriage is fraudulent, Mrs. Harrington, entered into solely for the purpose of meeting the will's requirements without genuine intention to form a marital union." "That's not true," Seren said immediately. "Isn't it?" Tyler stepped forward, his smile sharp. "You married my brother the same day I left you at the altar. Didn't even change out of your wedding dress. You expect anyone to believe that was love at first sight? I expect people to mind their own business. It becomes my business when it affects my inheritance." Tyler's voice hardened. "My father's will splits the estate between his sons contingent on marriage. Dante gets his half if he's married by 35. But if that marriage is fraudulent, it doesn't count, which means the estate stays in probate and I get a shot at challenging the distribution." Dante stood, his movements controlled but radiating danger. "You signed away your claim when you ran out on your wedding. You don't get to come back now because you're broke and desperate." "I signed away nothing. I postponed. There's a difference." Tyler's eyes glittered. "And I have evidence. Witness statements that your marriage is a sham, that you live in separate wings, barely speak to each other, only appear together in public for show." "Those statements are outdated and wrong," Dante said. "Then prove it." The gray-haired lawyer leaned forward. "Prove that this marriage is legitimate, that Mrs. Harrington married you for love and not for money or social status." "We don't have to prove anything to you," Seren said. "Actually, you do, if this goes to court." The lawyer smiled thinly. "Of course, we could avoid all that unpleasantness. A simple settlement. Tyler gets 40% of the estate, you keep the rest, and we all walk away without the media circus." "Absolutely not," Dante said. "Then we'll see you in court. Discovery will be extensive. Every financial transaction, every communication, every detail of your relationship scrutinized. It won't be pleasant." The lawyer stood, gathering his documents. "Think about it, Mr. Harrington. You have 48 hours to accept our offer. After that, we file." They left, Tyler shooting Seren one last triumphant look before following the lawyers out. The door closed, and the silence that followed felt suffocating. "Dante, don't." He held up a hand, his jaw tight. "Just give me a minute." She watched him pace the length of the office, his hands curled into fists, every muscle in his body tense. When he finally stopped, he slammed his palm against the desk, hard enough to make her jump. "I should have seen this coming. Should have anticipated it." "How could you? Tyler's an idiot. Who knew he'd actually hire competent lawyers?" "He didn't. Someone else did." Dante's eyes were hard. "Someone with money and a grudge. Marcus, probably. Or one of the other board members who want to keep the business dirty." "What do we do?" "We fight. We get our own lawyers, we gather evidence, we prepare for trial. He ran both hands through his hair. But Seren, it's going to be bad. They're going to dig into everything. Your family's finances, our relationship, every moment since we got married. They'll twist it all to make us look like con artists. Let them try. She crossed to him, taking his hands in hers. We know the truth. We know this is real now. Now, yes, but it wasn't at the start. And that's what they'll focus on. His voice was raw. They'll make you testify. They'll ask you under oath if you married me for love. And when you have to say no, when you have to admit you married me because you were desperate and I was convenient, it's going to destroy any credibility we have. Seren's chest tightened. Then I lie. You can't. Perjury is a crime. I won't let you put yourself at risk for this. Then what? We just give Tyler what he wants? Hand over millions of dollars because he got cold feet at his own wedding? No. Dante pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her. We find another way. I just need to figure out what that is. They stood there in his office, holding each other, and Seren felt the weight of the world pressing down on them. This wasn't just about money or inheritance. It was about Tyler trying to punish them both for moving on. About people who wanted to see Dante fail. About a system designed to tear apart anything that looked too good to be true. That night, lying in bed with Dante's arm around her, Seren couldn't sleep. Her mind kept spinning through scenarios, each one worse than the last. A trial would destroy them. The media would have a field day. Every detail of their relationship would be picked apart and analyzed. And in the end, Tyler might actually win. You're thinking too loud, Dante murmured against her hair. Sorry. Don't be. His hand found hers in the darkness. I'm thinking too. What are you thinking about? How much I want to kill my brother. That's not helpful? I know, but it's honest. He shifted, pulling her closer. I'm also thinking that maybe we should just pay him. Give him the settlement and be done with it. Seren sat up, turning to look at him. You can't be serious. I'm always serious about money. That's not what this is about. Tyler doesn't deserve anything. He left, he ran away, and now he wants to be rewarded for it? He wants money. I have money. It's the simplest solution. It's giving up. Seren's voice rose. It's letting him win. If it keeps you out of a courtroom, I don't care about winning. Well, I do. She pulled away from him, anger flooding through her. I care that he gets to humiliate me twice. I care that everyone will think I married you for money and got caught. I care that we're letting people like Marcus and Tyler dictate our lives. Seren, no. You don't get to protect me from this by throwing money at it. She was on her feet now, pacing. I'm not some damsel who needs rescuing. I'm your wife. And if we're going to fight this, we fight it together. Dante sat up, watching her. You have no idea what you're asking for. Then explain it to me. Stop trying to shield me and just tell me the truth. He was quiet for a long moment, then sighed. If we go to trial, they'll paint you as a gold digger. They'll find every financial struggle your family had and use it as evidence that you were desperate. They'll dig up every moment from our early marriage where we weren't affectionate enough, every public appearance where you looked uncomfortable. And they'll put you on the stand and ask you point blank, did you love Dante Harrington when you married him? And I'll say the truth, that I didn't love you then, but I do now. The words were out before she could stop them, hanging in the air between them like something fragile and new. Dante stared at her, his expression unreadable. You love me, he said slowly. Seren's heart was pounding. I think so. I don't know, maybe I'm just confusing it with whatever this is. Seren. He stood, crossed to her, and took her face in his hands. Say it again. I love you. The words came easier this time. I know it's fast and probably stupid and definitely inconvenient given the circumstances, but I do. I love you. Dante kissed her, hard and desperate, like he was trying to pour everything he couldn't say into that one gesture. When they broke apart, his forehead rested against hers. I've loved you since that first night, he said roughly, when you stood there in that ridiculous wedding dress and said yes, even though you had no idea what you were getting into. I've loved you every day since, and I will burn down everything I've built before I let Tyler take you from me. Seren felt tears on her cheeks but didn't bother wiping them away. Then we fight. Together. Together, he agreed. They went back to bed, tangled together, and this time when Seren closed her eyes, she wasn't afraid. The morning came too fast, sunlight spilling through the windows in harsh slants that made everything feel too exposed. Seren woke to find Dante already up, standing by the window with his phone pressed to his ear, his voice low and clipped. She could only catch fragments of the conversation. No settlement. Prepare for litigation. I don't care what it costs. Before he noticed she was awake and ended the call. Are lawyers? She asked, sitting up. Yeah, they're not happy about the fight, but they'll do it. He came back to the bed, still wearing yesterday's shirt, wrinkled now. This is going to move fast. Tyler's team filed the challenge this morning. We have a preliminary hearing in 2 weeks. 2 weeks? That's barely enough time to... I know. He sat on the edge of the bed, exhaustion written in every line of his body. They're trying to catch us unprepared, rushing the process so we make mistakes. Then we don't make mistakes. Easier said than done. He ran his hand over his face. I need you to be ready for what's coming. The depositions, the questions, the media. It's going to get ugly. I can handle ugly. Can you handle them asking about your father's gambling debts? About the loan sharks who were threatening your family before we got married? About the fact that you had exactly $300 in your bank account the day of the wedding? His voice wasn't cruel, just factual. Because they will. They'll make it sound like you married me to escape poverty, like you're some kind of opportunist who saw a meal ticket. Seren felt her stomach twist, but she kept her voice steady. Let them. We know the truth. The truth is complicated. That's the problem. Dante stood, pacing. The truth is that you did marry me partly because you were desperate. That I did use the situation to get what I wanted. That we weren't in love at the altar, even if we are now. And juries don't like complicated. They like simple narratives. Gold digger marries rich man. That's simple. So we give them a different story. What story? The one where I manipulated you into saying yes? Where I've been obsessed with you for months and used my brother's cowardice as an opportunity? He shook his head. That doesn't exactly paint me as the good guy either. Seren got out of bed, crossing to him. Stop thinking like this is a business deal. Stop trying to control the narrative. Just tell the truth. All of it. Yes, I was desperate. Yes, you offered me an escape. But somewhere between the altar and now, it became real. We became real. And if they don't believe that, then we make them believe it. She took his hands, forcing him to look at her. We show them what we are now, not what we were then. We prove that this marriage is legitimate in every way that matters. Dante pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her like he was afraid she might disappear. I don't deserve you. Probably not, but you've got me anyway. The next 2 weeks were a blur of preparation. Lawyers came to the house daily, going through every detail of their relationship with surgical precision. Where did you sleep the first month? Separate rooms. How often did you have dinner together initially? Once, maybe twice a week. Did Mr. Harrington ever tell you he loved you before the wedding? No. After? Not for weeks. Each answer felt like giving ammunition to the enemy. But their lead attorney, a sharp woman named Victoria Chen, who'd built her career on high-stakes litigation, insisted on honesty. They already know most of this, Victoria said, spreading documents across the dining room table. Tyler's been collecting evidence since the wedding. Witness statements from staff, photos from events where you looked uncomfortable together, financial records showing the timing of debt payments. The worst thing you can do is lie and get caught. So we get ahead of it. We acknowledge the rough start and then show the evolution. How? Seren asked. Testimony, evidence of cohabitation, joint accounts, shared activities, affection in private settings. Victoria looked between them. I need you to document everything. Photos, receipts, witnesses who can testify to seeing you together in intimate, genuine moments. Build a timeline that shows this marriage growing into something real. Dante's jaw tightened. You want us to prove we're in love. I want you to prove you're married. Actually married, not just legally married. Victoria's expression softened slightly. I've seen your case, and I believe you. But a judge needs more than belief. They need evidence. So they provided it. Photos of mornings in the kitchen, Dante cooking breakfast while Seren read the news on her tablet. Receipts from the antique bookstore where he'd bought her a first edition of her favorite novel. Testimony from Maria about the night she'd found them asleep on the couch together. Some movie playing unwatched on the TV. Text messages, surprisingly tender ones that Serene hadn't realized Dante was capable of writing, asking how her day was, what she wanted for dinner, if she was okay. It felt invasive, laying their private life out for strangers to examine, but it also felt necessary. The preliminary hearing arrived on a gray Thursday that matched Serene's mood. The courthouse was an imposing building downtown, all marble columns and echoing hallways that smelled like old paper and anxiety. Reporters clustered outside, cameras flashing as Dante's car pulled up. "Don't answer questions," Victoria said from the front seat. "Don't react to anything they shout, just walk straight in." Dante squeezed Serene's hand. "Ready?" "No, but let's do it anyway." The cameras exploded into motion the moment they stepped out of the car. Voices overlapped, shouting questions that blurred together into noise. "Mrs. Harrington, did you marry for money? Dante, is it true you coerced your brother's fiancée? Is the marriage a fraud?" Dante's security formed a wall around them, and they pushed through to the courthouse entrance. Inside, the noise cut off abruptly, replaced by the hushed murmur of the building. Tyler was already there, standing with his lawyers near the courtroom doors. He was dressed in an expensive suit, his hair perfect, his expression smug. When he saw them, his smile widened. "Brother, sister-in-law." He made the titles sound like insults. "Ready for the show?" "Shut up, Tyler," Dante said flatly. Now, we're all family here. No need for hostility." Tyler's eyes slid to Saren. "How are you holding up? Can't be easy, having your whole life picked apart in public." "Better than running away to another country," Saren shot back. Tyler's smile faltered. Before he could respond, Victoria appeared at Dante's elbow. "Don't engage. Let's go in." The courtroom was smaller than Saren had expected, paneled in dark wood with rows of benches for observers. A handful of reporters sat in the back, notebooks ready. The judge's bench loomed at the front, empty for now. They took their seats at the plaintiff's table, because in this twisted situation, they were defending their marriage against Tyler's challenge, and waited. Judge Patricia Morrison entered 5 minutes later, a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and an expression that suggested she'd seen every trick in the book and wasn't impressed by any of them. Everyone stood, then sat at her signal. "This is a preliminary hearing for the matter of Tyler Harrington versus Dante Harrington, challenging the validity of the marriage between Dante Harrington and Saren Ashford Harrington." Judge Morrison's voice was crisp, no nonsense. "Counsel, present your arguments." Tyler's lead attorney stood, the same gray-haired man from the office, now looking even more like a shark. "Your Honor, we are here because the respondents entered into a fraudulent marriage for the sole purpose of meeting the requirements of their late father's will. The timing alone is damning. Miss Ashford was engaged to my client, Tyler Harrington, scheduled to marry him on June 15th. When Mr. Tyler Harrington was unable to attend the ceremony, his brother Dante stepped in and married the bride himself, on the same day, in the same location, wearing the same dress. This was not a romantic gesture. This was a calculated business transaction designed to secure an inheritance worth over $500 million. Saren felt the eyes of everyone in the courtroom on her. Her face burned, but she kept her expression neutral. Victoria stood smoothly. "Your Honor, the timing was unconventional, but that doesn't make the marriage fraudulent. Mr. Dante Harrington and Mrs. Saren Harrington have been living as husband and wife for over 2 months now. They share a home, finances, and a genuine marital relationship. The fact that their union began under unusual circumstances doesn't negate its legitimacy." "Living together doesn't prove love, Your Honor," Tyler's lawyer countered. "It proves cohabitation, which is easily faked for the purposes of maintaining a legal fiction." Judge Morrison held up a hand. "I've read the preliminary filings. What I need to determine today is whether there's sufficient cause to proceed to trial." "Mr. Crawford, you're alleging fraud. What evidence do you have beyond suspicious timing?" Crawford opened his briefcase, pulling out a thick folder. "We have testimony from household staff indicating that Mr. and Mrs. Harrington maintained separate bedrooms for the first month of their marriage. We have photographic evidence from public events showing them displaying minimal affection. We have financial records proving that Mrs. Harrington's family debts, totaling over $2 million, were paid off within 72 hours of the wedding. And we have testimony from witnesses who interacted with the couple in the weeks following the marriage, all stating that the relationship appeared cold and transactional. Your Honor, if I may, Victoria interjected, all of that evidence pertains to the early days of the marriage. Relationships evolve. The respondents have provided extensive documentation showing that their marriage has developed into a genuine partnership. Shared financial accounts opened voluntarily, joint property decisions, evidence of emotional intimacy and mutual support, which could all be fabricated to support their fraud, Crawford said smoothly. Judge Morrison looked between the lawyers, then at Dante and Seren. I'm inclined to let this proceed to discovery and trial. The evidence presented raises legitimate questions about the nature and intent of this marriage. However, she fixed Crawford with a stern look. I will not allow this to become a media circus. All depositions will be conducted in private. Any leaks to the press will result in sanctions. This is a legal matter, not entertainment. Crawford nodded. Understood, Your Honor. We'll reconvene in 6 weeks for trial. I expect both parties to conduct discovery professionally and expeditiously. Judge Morrison banged her gavel. Court adjourned. The noise in the courtroom rose immediately. Reporters scrambled for the exits, phones already out. Tyler turned in his seat, meeting Dante's eyes with a triumphant grin. Dante's expression was carved from stone. Outside, the media frenzy was even worse than before. Microphones thrust toward them, questions shouted over each other. Dante's security forced a path through the crowd, and they made it to the car without incident. But as they pulled away from the courthouse, Seren saw the headlines already forming on reporters' phones. Harrington marriage heads to trial. Fraud allegations mount. $500 million question, did she marry for love or money? Brothers battle over inheritance and abandoned bride. She closed her eyes, leaning her head back against the seat. I'm sorry, Dante said quietly. For what? For all of this. For putting you through it. You didn't put me through anything. I chose this, remember? She reached for his hand. We fight. Together. Together, he repeated, but his voice was hollow. The next few weeks were brutal. Depositions started immediately, long, grueling sessions where lawyers asked the same questions 17 different ways, trying to catch inconsistencies. They deposed Maria, who testified with quiet dignity about the evolution of the relationship she'd witnessed. They deposed Dante's business associates, mining for any hint that the marriage was discussed as a strategic move. They even deposed Seren's parents, which resulted in her mother crying through the entire session and her father looking like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Did your daughter ever express love for Dante Harrington before the wedding? Crawford asked her father. No, Robert Ashford admitted. She barely knew him. And when Mr. Harrington paid off your debts, over $2 million, did you question his motives? I was grateful. My family was saved. But did you question it? Robert hesitated. No, because you didn't care why he was doing it, as long as your debts were paid. Objection, Victoria said sharply. Speculation and badgering. But the damage was done. Seren watched the deposition video later that night, saw her father's face crumble, and felt sick. He's going to use that, she said. Going to make it sound like my whole family was in on some scheme. Your father was trying to protect you, Dante said. He was working at his desk, files spread everywhere, but he looked up when she spoke. Anyone watching that video will see a man who was desperate and grateful, not a co-conspirator. You don't know that. I know juries, I know people. Your father came across as honest and broken. That helps us, not them. Seren wanted to believe him, but doubt had been eating at her for weeks now. Every deposition, every piece of evidence, every question felt like another nail in their coffin. And the worst part was knowing that Tyler was right about some of it. She had married Dante partly for security. He had married her partly for the inheritance. The fact that they'd fallen in love afterward didn't erase the beginning. 3 weeks before trial, everything fell apart. Seren was going through her emails when she found it. A message from an address she didn't recognize, no subject line, just an attachment. She almost deleted it as spam, but something made her open it instead. It was a video, dated 2 days before the wedding, and it showed Dante and Tyler in what looked like their father's study, arguing. She turned up the volume, her heart sinking as the conversation became clear. "You're really going to do this?" Tyler's voice, angry and defensive. "Marry her yourself?" "Why not? You clearly don't want her." Dante, cold and calculating. "And I need a wife. The timing works." "This is insane. What about what she wants?" "She'll get exactly what she wants. Her family's debts cleared, her reputation intact, a life of luxury. And I get the inheritance. Everyone wins. Except it's a lie. It's a transaction. There's a difference." The video ended. Soren stared at the screen, her blood turning to ice. This was before the wedding. Before Dante had told her he'd been watching her for months, before he'd claimed he wanted her for more than convenience. This was him admitting to Tyler, in private, when he had no reason to lie, that the marriage was purely strategic. She heard footsteps in the hallway and closed her laptop quickly. Dante entered a moment later, loosening his tie. "Hey, I thought we could—" He stopped, seeing her face. "What's wrong?" "Nothing?" The lie tasted bitter. "Soren," I said nothing. "I'm just tired." She stood, moving past him toward the bathroom. "I'm going to take a shower." She locked the door behind her and turned on the water, then sank to the floor and let herself shake. The video played in her mind on repeat. "It's a transaction," said so casually, so matter-of-factly, like she was a business acquisition, not a person. He'd lied. Not about wanting her eventually, maybe, but about his initial motivations. He'd made it sound romantic, seeing her at a party, being drawn to her, taking the opportunity when Tyler ran. But that video told a different story, a colder one. When she finally emerged, Dante was waiting in the bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed with his hands clasped. "Talk to me," he said. "About what?" "About whatever's making you look at me like I'm a stranger." Soren pulled her laptop from her bag and opened the email without a word. She turned the screen toward him and pressed play. She watched his face as he listened to his own voice, saw the moment he realized what this was. When it ended, he was pale. "Where did you get this?" "Someone sent it to me. I don't know who." Her voice was flat. "Is it real?" "Soren, is it real?" She was shaking now, anger and hurt boiling over. "Did you actually say those things? That I was a transaction? That this was all about the inheritance?" "I said them, but not— It's not what it sounds like." "It sounds exactly like what it is. You lied to me. You told me you'd been watching me, that you wanted me, that stepping in at the wedding was because you couldn't stand to lose me. But that video was from before, which means you were already planning this before Tyler even ran." "No, I was angry. Tyler had just told me he was leaving and I was venting by calling our marriage a transaction." "Yes!" Dante stood, running his hands through his hair. "Because that's how I was trying to think of it. How I had to think of it to justify what I was about to do. I was trying to convince myself it was logical, strategic, anything but what it actually was." "Which was what?" "Desperate." His voice cracked. "I was desperate for a reason to be close to you. Tyler leaving gave me that, and I grabbed it with both hands. But I knew that I was being selfish, that I was using the situation, so I told myself it was business. I told Tyler it was business, because if I admitted the truth, even to myself, I would have had to face what I was really doing." "And what were you doing?" "Manipulating you into marrying me because I'd fallen for you and couldn't think of another way to have you." He looked wrecked, his composure completely gone. "I'm not proud of it. I'm not proud of any of it. But yes, I lied. I made it sound more noble than it was, because the truth is that I saw an opportunity and I took it, and I've been trying to make up for that ever since." Soren felt tears burning her eyes. "How am I supposed to believe anything you say now?" "I don't know. I don't know how to prove it to you." He stepped toward her, hands outstretched. "But I love you. That part is true. Everything I've felt for the past 2 months, that's real." The beginning was messy and selfish, but what we are now is going to trial in 3 weeks, and the other side just got handed a video of you admitting our marriage is fake. She wiped her eyes angrily. "Do you understand what this does? This destroys everything. Every piece of evidence we've built showing that this marriage evolved into something real. It all falls apart when they show a jury that video." We don't have to give it to them. What? It's not in discovery. Whoever sent it to you sent it anonymously. We could bury it. That's illegal. Withholding evidence. It's a gray area. No, it's not. Seren's voice rose. It's fraud. It's exactly what they're accusing us of, and I won't do it. I won't prove them right. Then what do you want me to do? Dante's voice was ragged. Tell me how to fix this. I don't know if you can. The words hurt to say. I need time. To think. To figure out if I can trust you again. Seren, please. Don't. She held up a hand. Just give me space. Please. She grabbed her phone and left before he could respond, walking through the house until she found herself in the library. She curled up in the leather chair by the window and finally let herself cry. For the marriage she'd thought she was building, for the trust that had just been shattered, for the trial that was going to tear them apart, whether they wanted it to or not. She must have fallen asleep there because when she woke, it was dark outside and someone had covered her with a blanket. A note lay on the side table in Dante's handwriting. I'm sorry for all of it. Take all the time you need. I'll sleep in the guest room. D. Seren held the note, reading it over and over, and wondered if sorry was enough. The days that followed were some of the loneliest Seren had ever experienced. Even though she was living in a house with a dozen staff members and a husband who kept trying to catch her eye across rooms. She moved through the estate like a ghost, avoiding Dante during the day and lying awake at night knowing he was doing the same thing one floor below. The video had changed everything. Not because it revealed something she hadn't suspected, she'd always known their beginning was transactional, but because it proved he'd lied about the depth of his initial feelings. He'd made it sound like fate when it was really just opportunism dressed up in prettier words. Victoria called 3 days before the trial with news that made Seren's stomach drop. Tyler's team has the video, she said without preamble. I don't know how, but they're planning to introduce it as evidence. We need to get ahead of this. How? Seren asked, her voice hollow. By controlling the narrative. Dante needs to testify first and admit to everything, the strategic thinking, the manipulation, all of it. If he owns it before they can weaponize it, we take away some of their power. Victoria paused. But Seren, I need you to decide something. Are you still in this fight? Because if you're having doubts, if you're planning to walk away, I need to know now. I can't build a defense around a marriage you're not committed to. Seren looked out the window at the gardens, at the life she'd built here over the past 3 months. I don't know what I'm committed to anymore. Then figure it out, fast. Because in 3 days, you're going to have to sit in that courtroom and convince a judge that this marriage is worth protecting, and you can't do that if you don't believe it yourself. After hanging up, Seren found herself wandering to the west wing. The door to Dante's office was open, and she could see him inside, surrounded by paperwork, his shoulders hunched with exhaustion. He must have sensed her presence because he looked up, and for a moment they just stared at each other. Can we talk? She asked. He stood immediately. Of course. Yes, come in. She stepped into the office, closing the door behind her. Victoria called. They have the video. I know, my lawyers told me an hour ago. He looked wrecked, dark circles under his eyes, his shirt rumpled. I'm sorry, Seren. I'm sorry for all of it. For lying, for manipulating the situation, for dragging you into this mess. Stop apologizing and just answer a question honestly. She crossed her arms, trying to hold herself together. Do you actually love me? Or have you just convinced yourself you do because it makes this whole thing easier to live with? I love you. No hesitation. I loved you before I had any right to. I loved you when you hated me. I loved you when you looked at me like I was a stranger. And I love you now, even though I know I don't deserve it. That's not good enough. Her voice cracked. Love isn't just a feeling, Dante. It's a choice. It's honesty and trust and partnership. And you took those things from me. You made decisions for me, kept secrets, lied about your motivations. How is that love? It's not. He ran his hands through his hair, his composure crumbling. It's selfish and broken and completely screwed up, but it's also the truth. I don't know how to love someone without trying to control everything, without trying to fix things and protect people and make sure nothing goes wrong. My father taught me that weakness gets you killed, that emotions are leverage, that the only way to survive is to stay 3 steps ahead of everyone else. His voice was rough. But you make me want to be different. You make me want to trust instead of control. And I'm trying. I'm failing, but I'm trying. Seren felt tears sliding down her cheeks. I need honesty. Complete, uncomfortable, inconvenient honesty. No more protection. No more deciding what I can handle. Okay? He stepped closer. Then here's the truth. I saw you at that fundraiser, and I couldn't stop thinking about you. I found out everything I could. Where you lived, what you did, who you were marrying. And when Tyler told me he was running, my first thought wasn't about the inheritance. It was that I finally had a chance. That maybe I could step in and you'd say yes because you needed someone, and I could be that someone. He took a shaky breath. I told myself it was strategy because that was easier than admitting I was obsessed with a woman I'd spoken to for 5 minutes. The video you saw, that was me trying to convince Tyler and myself that I had logical reasons for doing something completely irrational. What about the inheritance? You needed to be married. I did. But I could have married anyone, hired an actress, found someone more suitable, done it the clean way. I chose you because I wanted you. The inheritance was just the excuse that made it possible. Seren closed her eyes, trying to process everything. Why didn't you just tell me this from the beginning? Because I was terrified you'd say no, that if you knew how much I wanted you, you'd see it as pressure, as another form of manipulation. His voice dropped. I thought if I kept it professional, kept it about the arrangement, you might actually stay. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being about the inheritance and started being about you. About us. When? That first week. When you came down to breakfast and sat across from me and asked if I took my coffee black or with milk. It was such a normal question, such a small moment of trying to know me. And I realized I wanted that. I wanted someone to ask me about coffee and mean it, to care about the answer. He laughed, but it was a broken sound. Pathetic, right? The big bad Mafia boss undone by a question about coffee. Not pathetic. Human. Seren wiped her eyes. You're allowed to be human, Dante. You're allowed to want connection and mess it up and not have all the answers. But you have to let me in. You have to trust me with the messy parts. I know, and I will, if you give me another chance. She looked at him, really looked at him. At the man who'd saved her family, married her in a church full of strangers, defended her against his own brother, and loved her in the only broken way he knew how. He wasn't perfect. He'd lied and manipulated and controlled things because that's what he'd been taught to do. But he was also trying, failing sometimes, but trying. One more chance, she said quietly. But Dante, if you lie to me again, if you keep things from me because you think you're protecting me, we're done. I mean it. I won't, I promise. He crossed to her, taking her face in his hands. I promise. She kissed him, and it felt like coming home after being lost. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against his. We need to talk about the trial, she said. I know. Victoria wants me to testify first. Admit to everything. Will that help? Honestly, I don't know, but it's the only play we have. He pulled back, looking at her seriously. Seren, there's a real chance we lose this. That Tyler wins and the marriage gets annulled and you walk away with nothing. I won't walk away with nothing. I'll walk away with the truth. That's more than I had when I was standing at that altar waiting for someone who didn't care enough to show up. The day of the trial arrived with gray skies and the kind of cold rain that felt personal. Seren dressed carefully in a navy suit that Victoria had picked out, professional but not severe, expensive but not flashy. Dante wore charcoal gray, his usual armor, though she could see the tension in his jaw as they drove to the courthouse. The media presence was even worse than the preliminary hearing. Cameras everywhere, reporters shouting questions, people with signs that said things like gold digger and fraud. Seren kept her eyes forward, Dante's hand warm and steady on her back as they pushed through to the entrance. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Seren recognized faces from various society events, business associates of Dante's, even a few of her parents' old friends who'd clearly come to watch the spectacle. Her mother and father sat near the back, her mother clutching a tissue, her father looking like he'd aged 10 years. Tyler sat at the plaintiff's table with his lawyers, looking smug and well-rested. When he caught Seren's eye, he had the audacity to wink. Judge Morrison entered, and everyone rose. The trial began with opening statements, Crawford painting a picture of calculated fraud, Victoria arguing for a marriage that had grown into something genuine despite its unusual beginning. Then came the witnesses. Crawford called staff members who testified about separate bedrooms and formal interactions. He called business associates who'd heard Dante mention needing to marry before his birthday. He called a private investigator who documented Saren's family's financial troubles in excruciating detail. Then he called Tyler. Tyler took the stand with the confidence of someone who thought he'd already won. Crawford led him through the timeline, the engagement to Seren, the decision to leave, the phone call to Dante. "And what did your brother say when you told him you were leaving?" Crawford asked. "He said he'd handle it, that he'd take care of everything." Tyler's voice was smooth. "At the time, I thought he meant he'd make excuses to the guests. I didn't realize he meant he'd marry her himself." "Did he ever express romantic interest in Miss Ashford before that day?" "Never. I'd been dating her for 8 months and he barely acknowledged her existence." "So his decision to marry her seemed sudden to you?" "Completely out of character. The only thing that made sense was the inheritance clause in our father's will. Dante needed a wife by his 35th birthday, which was days away. Seren needed money. It was convenient for both of them." Victoria cross-examined, trying to poke holes in Tyler's narrative, but he was too well prepared. When he stepped down, Seren could see the satisfaction on his face. Then Crawford played the video. The courtroom went silent as Dante's voice filled the space. "It's a transaction. There's a difference." Seren watched the jurors' faces shift, skepticism settling in. When it ended, Crawford looked at the judge with barely concealed triumph. "Your Honor, I think that speaks for itself." Victoria stood. "We'd like to call Dante Harrington to the stand." Dante walked to the witness box with his head high, but Seren could see the tension in his shoulders. He was sworn in, and Victoria began her questioning. "Mr. Harrington, you've just heard that video. Is that your voice?" "It is." "And were those your words?" "Yes." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Victoria pressed on. "Can you explain the context of that conversation?" "My brother had just told me he was abandoning his fiancée at the altar. I was angry. At him. At the situation. At myself for what I was about to do." "Which was?" "Marry Seren myself." Dante's voice was steady. "Tyler asked if I was serious, and I told him yes. He asked why, and I lied. I said it was strategic, transactional, about the inheritance, because that was easier than admitting the truth." "Which was?" "That I'd wanted her for months. That I'd been watching her, trying to find an excuse to talk to her. That Tyler leaving gave me an opening I'd been too much of a coward to create for myself." He looked directly at the jury. "I manipulated the situation. I used her desperation and my resources to convince her to marry me, and then I lied about my motivations because I was ashamed of how selfish I was being." The courtroom was dead silent now. Even Crawford looked surprised. Victoria continued. "So you admit the marriage began as a transaction?" "Yes. On my end, absolutely. I wanted Seren, and I wanted the inheritance, and marrying her solved both problems." "And on her end?" "She was desperate. Her family was drowning in debt. I offered her a way out, and she took it. I don't blame her for that. Anyone would have done the same." "Mr. Harrington, if the marriage began as a transaction, why are we here? Why fight to keep it?" Dante was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Because somewhere between the altar and now, it became real. Seren became the person I came home to, the person I wanted to tell about my day, the person whose opinion mattered more than anyone else's. I fell in love with her, really in love, not the obsession I'd convinced myself was love before. And she gave me a chance I didn't deserve." He looked at Seren, his eyes shining. "I know how this started. I know it was manipulative and wrong, but what we have now, that's real, and I'll fight for it as long as she'll let me." Victoria yielded to Crawford for cross-examination. He stood, circling Dante like a predator. "Mr. Harrington, you've given quite a performance, but isn't it true that you'd say anything to protect a $500 million inheritance?" "I'd say the truth, which is what I just did." "The truth. Let's examine that. You claim you fell in love with Mrs. Harrington. When exactly did that happen?" "Gradually, over weeks and months. How convenient, falling in love on a timeline that just happens to coincide with the legal requirements of your father's will. Love doesn't work on a timeline, it just happens. Does it? Or did you simply decide that claiming love was more defensible than admitting this is still a business arrangement? Crawford leaned in. Tell me, Mr. Harrington, if the inheritance was off the table, if there was no money at stake, would you still be fighting to keep this marriage? Yes. Even knowing it began with lies? Especially knowing that. Because Seren saw past the lies. She saw who I actually am, the broken, controlling, paranoid parts I hide from everyone else. And she stayed anyway. That's not something you walk away from. Crawford smiled coldly. Or it's something you'd say to protect $500 million. No further questions. After a brief recess, Victoria called Seren to the stand. Walking to the witness box felt like moving through water. Every eye in the room was on her, judging, speculating, waiting for her to either save or condemn this marriage. She was sworn in, and Victoria began gently. Mrs. Harrington, can you tell the court about the day you married Dante Harrington? Seren took a breath. It was supposed to be my wedding day, to Tyler. He didn't show up. And while I was standing there in front of 300 people watching my life fall apart, Dante walked in and offered me a choice. What choice? Marry him instead or face the scandal alone? Why did you say yes? Because I was terrified, because my family was drowning in debt, and I saw a way to save them. Because staying there and being humiliated felt unbearable. She paused. And because something about the way Dante looked at me made me think maybe, just maybe, this could be more than a transaction. Was it love at first sight? No. It was desperation at first sight. Love came later. Victoria walked her through the timeline, the separate rooms, the awkward dinners, the slow building of trust. Then came the hard part. Mrs. Harrington, you've heard the video. You've heard your husband admit to manipulation and lies. Why are you still here? Seren looked at Dante, sitting at the table with his hands clasped, his expression open and vulnerable in a way she'd never seen in public. Because people aren't defined by their worst moments. They're defined by what they do after. Dante lied about his reasons for marrying me. He manipulated the situation. He tried to control things because that's what he'd been taught to do his whole life. Her voice strengthened. But he also protected me. He paid off debts he had no obligation to pay. He stood up to his own brother for me. He learned to trust me with parts of himself he'd never shown anyone. And when I found out about the lies, he didn't make excuses. He owned it. He gave me space to decide if I could forgive him. That's not the behavior of someone running a con. That's the behavior of someone trying to be better. So you believe the marriage is genuine now? I know it is. Because I love him. Not his money or his name or his protection. Him. The man who brings me coffee in the morning and asks about my day and looks at me like I'm the most important person in the world. That's not something you can fake. Crawford's cross-examination was brutal. He asked about the money, the timing, her family's debts, every uncomfortable detail. But Seren held her ground. Isn't it true that before marrying Mr. Harrington, you had $300 in your bank account? Yes. And now you have access to millions? Yes. That's quite an upgrade. It is, but I'd give it all back if it meant keeping my marriage. Easy to say when you know you don't have to. Try me. Seren looked him directly in the eye. Draw up the papers. I'll sign away every dollar. I'll move out of that estate tomorrow. I'll get a job in an apartment and start over with nothing. As long as I get to keep Dante, I don't care about the rest. Crawford blinked, clearly not expecting that. Your Honor, that's a lovely sentiment, but it's not legally binding. Then make it binding, Seren interrupted. I mean it. If the court wants proof this isn't about money, I'll prove it. Right here, right now. Judge Morrison raised an eyebrow. Mrs. Harrington, that's not necessary. But it is. Seren turned to the judge. Because everyone in this room thinks I'm a gold digger who saw an opportunity and took it. And maybe that's how it started. Maybe I did marry Dante partly because he could save my family. But that's not why I'm still here. I'm here because I found something I didn't expect. A partner, a husband, someone who sees me as an equal even when he's failing at it. And I'm not giving that up for money or reputation or because Tyler Harrington decided he wants a second chance at an inheritance he abandoned. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Morrison banged her gavel. Order, Mrs. Harrington, you may step down. Seren returned to her seat, her heart pounding. Dante reached for her hand under the table, squeezing it tight. Both sides gave closing arguments. Crawford argued fraud, manipulation, a marriage of convenience that didn't meet the spirit of the will's requirements. Victoria argued evolution, genuine feeling, a relationship that had grown beyond its transactional origins. Then Judge Morrison took a recess to deliberate. The waiting was agony. Seren and Dante sat in a conference room down the hall, neither speaking, both lost in their own thoughts. After 2 hours, they were called back. The courtroom was even more packed than before, people standing in the back when the seats filled up. Judge Morrison entered, her expression unreadable. "I've reviewed all the evidence and testimony," she began. "This is a complicated case. The marriage between Dante Harrington and Seren Harrington clearly began under unusual circumstances. There's no denying the transactional elements, debt repayment, inheritance requirements, strategic timing. Under normal circumstances, these facts would be sufficient to find fraud." Seren's heart sank. She felt Dante's hand tighten on hers. "However," Judge Morrison continued, "marriage is not a static institution. It's a living relationship that evolves over time. The question before this court is not whether the marriage began as a transaction, but whether it has become genuine in the months since." And after hearing the testimony, particularly Mrs. Harrington's offer to renounce all financial benefit, I'm convinced that whatever this marriage was at the beginning, it has developed into something real. Hope flickered in Seren's chest. The plaintiff has failed to prove current fraud. A marriage that begins imperfectly but grows into genuine partnership is still a valid marriage under the law. Therefore, I find in favor of the defendants. The marriage between Dante Harrington and Seren Harrington is legitimate and meets the requirements of the late Mr. Harrington's will. Case dismissed. The gavel came down with a crack that echoed through the stunned courtroom. For a moment, no one moved. Then Dante pulled Seren into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. Around them, people were talking, reporters were scrambling for the exits, Tyler was arguing with his lawyers. But Seren heard none of it. All she heard was Dante's voice in her ear, rough and broken. "Thank you. Thank you for fighting, for staying, for believing in this." "Always," she whispered back. Outside the courthouse, the media frenzy was insane, but Seren didn't care. She stood next to Dante, his arm around her waist, and answered questions with her head high. Yes, the marriage had begun unusually. Yes, they'd faced challenges. Yes, they'd won. And yes, they were happy. That night back at the estate, they stood in the garden under stars that finally seemed to shine for them instead of against them. "I meant what I said in there," Seren told him. "About giving up the money. I don't need any of this." "I know, but you're not giving it up." Dante pulled her close. "Because it's yours now. The house, the accounts, all of it. I'm having the lawyers draw up papers making you co-owner of everything, equal partners in every way." Dante, you don't have to. I want to. I want you to know that this isn't about power or control anymore. It's about us. Building something together." He cupped her face in his hands. "I love you. Not because you're convenient or useful or strategically valuable. I love you because you make me want to be better, because you call me on my crap, because you stayed when you had every reason to leave. I love you too, even when you're being an overprotective control freak who thinks he knows better than everyone else. I'm working on that. I know. Keep working." They kissed under the stars, and it felt like a promise, not of perfection, but of trying, of choosing each other every day, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. 6 months later, Tyler was spotted in Europe, broke and bitter, living off the goodwill of friends who were quickly running out of patience. Marcus and the other board members who'd backed the challenge quietly resigned, replaced by people Dante trusted. The businesses continued their transformation from gray area to legitimate, slowly but surely. And Seren found her purpose. She started a foundation for families drowning in debt, offering financial counseling and assistance without the shame or judgment her own family had faced. Dante supported her completely, using his connections and resources to make it succeed. They weren't perfect. They still fought about his tendency to make decisions without consulting her, about her stubborn independence, about 1,000 small things that couples fight about. But they fought fair, and they always came back to each other. 1 year to the day after the disastrous wedding, Dante surprised her. Get dressed, he said at breakfast. Something nice. Why? You'll see. An hour later, they pulled up in front of St. Catherine's, the same church where everything had started. Seren looked at him, confused. What are we doing here? Getting married. Again. The right way this time. He got out and offered his hand. If you'll have me. Inside, the church was empty except for Maria, Victoria, and a few close friends. No 300 guests, no press, no pressure, just the people who mattered. The same officiant who'd married them the first time stood at the altar, smiling. Ready to do this right? He asked. Dante looked at Seren, his eyes full of love and hope and promise. More than ready. They exchanged new vows. Not the rushed, desperate words from a year ago, but honest promises about partnership and trust and choosing each other every single day. And when the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was nothing like that first awkward press of lips. It was real and deep and full of everything they'd built together. As they walked back down the aisle, hand in hand, Seren thought about how strange life was, how the worst day of her life had somehow led to the best, how being abandoned at the altar had put her on a path to finding real love, how a transaction had become a partnership, and a partnership had become a marriage worth fighting for. The truth was, love rarely arrived the way you expected. Sometimes it showed up in a black suit when you were drowning in humiliation, offering salvation that came with strings attached. Sometimes it grew slowly over breakfast and late-night conversations, and the gradual letting down of walls. Sometimes it required forgiveness for lies and manipulation and all the ways people hurt each other when they're too afraid to be vulnerable. But when it was real, when it was built on honesty and choice and mutual respect, it was worth every messy, imperfect moment it took to get there. Outside the church, Dante pulled her close one more time. Any regrets? Seren thought about everything, the humiliation, the trial, the lies, the fights, the fear. And then she thought about the man standing in front of her who'd learned to trust instead of control, to ask instead of demand, to love instead of possess. Not a single one, she said. And she meant it. Because in the end, the best love stories aren't about perfect beginnings. They're about two imperfect people who choose each other, keep choosing each other, and build something real from the wreckage of what came before. They're about rescue that goes both ways. About finding home in the last place you expected. About standing at an altar twice, once out of desperation, once out of choice, and discovering that the second time, you mean every word. Seren had been left at an altar by a man who didn't value her, and she'd been saved by a man who did, even if he'd taken a while to show it properly. That was the thing about second chances. They didn't erase the pain of the first attempt. They just proved that sometimes the disaster was actually a detour to something better. Standing there in the sunlight with Dante's arms around her, Seren finally understood what her mother had been trying to tell her all those years ago when she said that sometimes the best marriages were the ones you didn't expect. Not because they were easy, but because they were earned. Because they required both people to show up fully, honestly, imperfectly, and choose each other anyway. And that was exactly what she and Dante had done. They drove away from the church together toward a future they'd build as equals, as partners, as two people who'd learned the hard way that love wasn't about grand gestures or perfect timing. It was about showing up every day and doing the work, about honesty even when it hurt, about trust built slowly, brick by brick, until it became unshakable. The girl who'd stood alone at an altar a year ago was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her worth, who'd faced down a courtroom full of judgment and come out stronger, who'd learned that the best revenge against abandonment wasn't bitterness, but building something beautiful from the ashes. And the man beside her? He'd learned that control was an illusion, that vulnerability was strength, and that the best way to protect someone you love is to trust them to protect themselves. Together, they'd taken something broken and made it whole. Not perfect, never perfect, but real and honest and theirs. And in the end, that was everything.